Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be here. So I work on human-robot interaction. So for a little bit of something different now, I wanted to share with you sort of one vignette through why I find this problem so interesting and challenging. So when we think about robots today, we think of them as sort of somewhere off on their own, doing their thing, like this quadrotor flying around, robot arm picking stuff up, or this autonomous car driving around with nobody at the wheel. I got to do this in San Francisco recently, and it was like magic. I loved it. But these pictures don't really tell the whole picture. There's something kind of lying to you about these, and that's the fact that whenever robots are out there, they're pretty much never on their own. If they want to be useful to us, how often does it happen that the road is totally empty and there's no one around? Not in San Francisco. So most of the time, the world for an autonomous cars look something like this, where the car actually needs to not just do its job on its own, but also in coordination with all these other people around. And I like to say, my favorite movie is WALL-E, and I like to say that it's not enough for robots to be capable of doing work once we kill off the planet and leave it. They have to actually be able to do their job while we're still on the planet. If you haven't seen WALL-E, please go ahead and watch it. It's really good. So robot arms, right? They need to be able to move and to work, not just in factories, but in our homes and offices and in our stores. And if I ever get a robot that's capable enough of cleaning my kitchen, I don't want it to say, okay, Anca, well, now you please leave your house and I'll be off here on my own doing the kitchen cleaning. Not even quadrotors, right? We think of quadrotors somewhere in the sky, but there's a company called Skydio, one of my friends started, and they're doing quadrotors that track you and navigate next to you and take cool videos of you. I used one of them at my wedding, so here I am getting married, and we had the Skydio drone. That's my dad over there. And even WALL-E made itself useful to me before we killed off the planet entirely. So my husband built this and actuated 7 degrees of freedom and used it to propose. Right? The bar for proposals has been set, everyone. So here's the thing. We typically pretend robotics is this problem where you have a robot and it has a task, like this quadrotor needs to exit through that door, and that's it. But that's not what robotics is. What robotics actually is yes, you have a quadrotor or a robot in general and it has a task, but there's also a person around or multiple people, and they're doing stuff. They're taking actions in the same space as the robot is taking actions. And that's what makes this problem so challenging, because for starters, the robot can't just figure out what to do on its own. It has to have some sort of predictions about what you as the human might do next so that it can stay out of your way. It turns out it's not enough to just know where you currently are and react to that, because usually you don't have, you get in the person's way, or you don't have enough time to stop, you have inertia and so on. So you have to have these predictions, same for cars. To figure out whether that's a safe thing, you have to figure out where other people might be going. And so, unlike sort of doing the task in isolation, doing the task in your presence basically means that this poor robot needs some sort of simulator of you inside its head, at least to some degree of approximation, so that it can anticipate what actions you'll take. And so when we started tackling this problem, we basically looked at the sheer complexity of sort of building a human simulator and giving it to the robot so the robot can figure out what to do, and sort of wanted to give up and say, treat the person as, I don't know what people will do, treat the person as an arbitrary black box, and allow for anything to happen. The person might literally do anything, and that's what control theory will teach you. Treat the person as a disturbance and protect against anything that they might do. But when you put that on a robot, the robot becomes completely useless. So let me show you an example of this. Here's a very simple thing. I have Ellis over here, who's one of my students. This is a little mobile robot that needs to go across the room. And the robot is protecting against any action that Ellis might take. And Ellis is just, minding his own business, slowly walking across the room. And the robot is like, oh my God, you might turn around and start running and trying to collide with me. Gotta get out of here. So, and if you have an autonomous car, basically it will refuse to leave the garage because, like, what if someone decides to just plow straight into it? So we can't build robots that way. And that's because, humans aren't actually adversarial. Unless you're playing chess or Go against the robot, you're not going to try to collide into it. You're not going to try to do whatever harms the robot's objective the most. So if humans are not arbitrary or adversarial, then what are they? And of course, this is the kind of thing where you have to use data. But you have to be very careful, it turns out, about how you leverage human data to build predictive models of humans. So we also, tried the typical approach. This is collecting a ton of data and throwing it at the problem. The person's still a black box. I have a giant neural net that makes predictions. And what tends to happen when you do that is you end up with these high-capacity models that pick up. They're sort of brittle. They pick up on spurious correlations in your data. Your robot starts acting. It creates new situations that drive that model out of distribution. And the model starts essentially barfing out weird predictions, like the person's going to go through these trees or break for no good reason, and so on and so forth. So that doesn't quite work either. And so then we started thinking, okay, if people aren't completely, if they're not adversarial, they're not completely arbitrary, there must be something that sort of we can use to structure these models and get them to be more aligned with the causal reasons why people actually take the actions they take. So what might that be? And the thing that drives my work in this area is that people act the way they do because they're driven by the intentions they have, their desires, their goals, their preferences. And that is the causal reason that explains our behavior. And so we kind of need to inject that and tell robots about that, and then they'll be able to make sort of more robust, stable predictions of us. So what does that mean? It means I am walking this way because I'm trying to get over there to that speaker, or I am steering and accelerating - braking this way because I'm trying to get home efficiently and safely, and so on. And so we thought that key to anticipating human actions is to figure out what these intentions are. If the robot knew that I wanted to reach that speaker, that it would have an easier time sort of figuring out that I'm more likely to sort of step towards it than step away from it. And that, what's more likely, what's not conditioned on a goal, is something that you can actually get from data. So the idea is, if you know about Markov decision processes, what we do is we learn a space of reward functions, latest space of reward functions, and treat human behavior as approximately optimal with respect to that reward function. And that turns out to sort of nicely structure things. And so the robot starts out online, not at inference time, not actually knowing exactly what you want. It doesn't know what your goal is. But the good news is that it can learn over time by observing your actions. Because every time you take a step, you're providing the robot evidence in a Bayesian sense about what it is that you want. You go towards the door. That's kind of more consistent with the fact that you want to leave. You go away from it. That sort of disagrees with your goal being to leave. And so this way, we're getting robots to sort of acquire this model, this predictive model of how people like you and me act. And so here's a demonstration, a very simple demonstration of this idea. So here we have a human labeled as human being for extra clarity. And we have a little quadrotor, and they're trying to navigate around each other. And so here you'll see this sort of on the right and top-down view. Each agent is quadrotor human. They each have a goal. And you'll see the sort of predictions that the quadrotor is making about the human emanating from there. And the quadrotor uses these predictions to make sure it can avoid collisions with the person. And here's a slightly more, also a simple example, but sort of, I think, maybe a little bit more illustrative, where there's two possible destinations the person might go to, and from time to time the predictor is a little bit confused. It doesn't really exactly know what's going on, and then the quadrotor leaves a little more space, and everything works out. So that's sort of how we deal with navigation. Now, if you try to do this for autonomous cars, it gets a little bit more complicated. So here's a situation where we have, let's say, an autonomous car in orange, and then we have a human-driven vehicle on the left. And the autonomous car has to merge into the left lane to take a left. And what will happen here is that the predictor will say, okay, the person will probably keep going forward at 50 miles per hour. So what you have to do is slow down and merge behind them. So far, so good. But what if you're in this sort of situation of higher traffic? Now you're sort of saying, well, this person will go, and I have to avoid collisions with them. And then this person will go, and I have to go avoid collisions with them. And you're waiting for this big enough gap in traffic where you can sort of safely merge in. And the issue with that is, again, it kind of makes cars useless because you end up having either slowing down and waiting for that gap in traffic and pissing off all the people behind you, or you end up kind of keep going and then missing your turn, and then the passenger gets pissed. And somehow, if one of us were in that kind of situation, remarkably, we invent a third option out of nowhere. And the reason we just go, and then someone slows down and makes space for us. And the reason that works, the reason you can do that, you and I can do that, and the robot can't, is because, yes, we make predictions about what other people will do, but we also know the secret that our actions end up influencing the actions that other people will take. And so it turns out you can't just make predictions about people and say, okay, I'm stuck with that. You actually have to account in interaction that the person will actually change condition on what you plan on doing. So you need these kind of conditional predictive models. So we had to go ahead and change the robot simulator to sort of make it realize that if it takes a different action, then that changes what the person will do. Their objective, their goal, their intent stays the same, but the way it makes sense for them to realize that objective now changes because the robot essentially changed the situation for them. And so humans are these influenceable beings. It's not just the robot anticipates you, you anticipate the robot. And you kind of have to account for that. So we're kind of going towards these game theoretic formulations for these models. And once you do that, then you have cars that realize, yes, okay, I don't have to be stuck merging in front of you. Sometimes it's safe for me to actually go in front and expect that you can slow down a little bit to accommodate me and create that gap in traffic. I want to share with you an example of what is basically, to this day, my favorite example from our autonomous driving work, which is what happens when you try to apply some of this work at a four-way stop. So at a four-way stop, and this is actually a little bit different than what you might expect. So at a four-way stop, of course you can do this thing now, which is like I can go and then the person will slow down. So you can make cars a little bit more assertive as opposed to waiting there, being stuck forever. I don't know if you've driven inside. How many of you are out of town? Okay, plenty. When you go around San Francisco, you might notice a lot of autonomous cars going about. And you'll notice something really interesting about them, which is that they'll actually sort of be there, come to a full stop, and wait for the person to go. And if you're next, they'll still wait for you to go. As long as you're an Uber driver, for instance, there's a little bit of like asserting themselves. Even if that's not their turn, they'll let you go, right? Now, with these kind of game theoretic models, we're sort of enabling autonomous cars to start playing that game, right? Entering into that negotiation space. My favorite example, though, is not when an autonomous car asserts itself. It's sort of the opposite. So here, we gave the autonomous car an objective that was included to be very courteous to other human drivers. So you can imagine you want to do this when you have an empty car. You don't have a particular destination that you need to be right away at. And so you might actually want to be nice, altruistic, nice to other road users. And so we said, okay, your objective autonomous car is now to reach your destination and blah, blah, blah. But you don't have to be as efficient, and you should care more about other people's efficiency. And then what the autonomous car did is it didn't go because that's not very nice to other people. That doesn't encourage their efficiency. It didn't stay put either and wait for them to go. Because it turns out people get confused. They're like, are you going? Are you not going? What's going on? what it did is it decided to start inching backwards from the intersection. And we saw this and we were like, what is going on? And then we tested it with people in a simulator, but people were driving and they went faster through the intersection. And what's going on here is that if you see the car as removing itself as a threat from you, you're more confident to go through. And it turns out pedestrians do this. They actually will take a step back from the crosswalk to kind of indicate to you that you can go. Haven't seen human drivers doing this. It's kind of hard to put your car in reverse. My student swears that on their way to a concert, they actually saw a car on a hill, sort of letting their car sort of slide back as a way. But I don't know. I haven't witnessed that myself. What's fascinating to me about this example is that, well, it turns out to work, and people actually go faster through the intersection. We've never seen this in data, right? It's not the kind of thing that you can see in data, but because the model has this kind of structure of you, the human, have these notions of efficiency, but also wanting to minimize your collision risk. The car can actually leverage that model to figure out that if it eliminates itself as a collision risk, then you're more likely to proceed. And it's completely out of distribution. Okay, last but not least, whenever you put inductive bias into a model, you'll be wrong sometimes. And so we structured the model, we imposed the structure, it's more robust, it's more reliable, but what if the structure is wrong? And let me show you an example of that. So let's say you spill some coffee in the middle of the foyer over there. What will people do? They'll step around the coffee. Now, this might not be the kind of thing you see in your data. And so your robot's model might have no idea that people have a preference for, not stepping on the coffee spill. And so let me try to play this again. What will happen then is it will use its model, and it will probably confidently keep making predictions of, okay, Sylvia's doing something weird now, but she'll turn around and go towards her goal any moment now, this will happen. Then you end up with this collision because the quadro relies on these predictions and doesn't get out of the way. So that's bad. And so these models fail when this assumption that people are approximately optimal with respect to their intent is just wrong, either because we don't have the right space of intentions, like people's preferences for avoiding coffee spills, or because people are actually irrational. Every time you go to the supermarket and you pick up the cookie at the checkout that they try to tempt you with, that's an example of you probably not optimizing for your long-term well-being. And in hindsight, you'd be like, oh, I wish I didn't do that because I didn't want to spend all this extra time on the treadmill. That's an example of a cognitive bias we might have. We're subject to temptation, and that's just life, and we deal with it. But that means that our actions are sometimes not really that representative of our intentions, and this model can be wrong then. And so when this happens, it'd be ideal to sort of be conservative. This thing that I showed you in the beginning, where we were defending against any possible thing, it's an actually pretty decent thing to do when you have no idea what the person will do, right? So what we thought about is, well, what if you actually monitored the performance of the model online, something we might call model introspection, and figure out which of us, kind of a spectrum of models from most rational to most arbitrary, fits best what we're seeing. And so if if there's a bee that comes and you run away from it, and the robot has no idea about you wanting to run away from bees, then what it will do is it will say, okay, well, the person was here. I was predicting this. This is what they did. But that was a very poor prediction. That's now evidence that my model is busted, right? Instead, if I use the model that said the person is sort of arbitrary, that kind of gives a uniform distribution of what the person might do, and that fits better with what happened. And so at the next step, the beautiful thing is the robot starts using more and more of this model that is like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to have higher entropy predictions. And automatically, the robot gets more conservative around it. And so here's Sylvia walking towards the coffee spill, and as she starts going away, the uncertainty grows, and the robot plans to give Sylvia more space. And this happens automatically because we're monitoring online this sort of model performance, the confidence we have in a model. And we have this principled way of expanding uncertainty in our predictions when the model stops fitting the data well. OK, so to me, robotics is very much not about robots just being capable on their own, like it's kind of boring. What it actually is being capable in coordination and in coexistence with people. And I hope that I was able to give you an idea today of just how nuanced and challenging and interesting this problem is. So with that, thanks for listening. And I've really just been the voice of my wonderful students and collaborators, so I wanted you to see their faces as well. Thank you.